athletic. Nicole, thank you so much for hopping on the Southeastern Podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime to talk to ladies in college football.
Yes,
absolutely. That actually was going to be my first question. We know just like having another woman in sports and being such a prominent figure in the college football world, it's good to kind of grow our network of women. Just kind of like, what was your journey of being a woman in sports and getting to where you are? Kind of what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we probably all get asked, like, how did we get into sports more than our male colleagues? Just because I guess that's weird. And it's assumed that like someone had to explain it to us. But, you know, I probably like you guys, I mean, grew up playing sports, loving sports. And it's funny that my career ended up taking me into college sports because I grew up near Princeton, New Jersey, and it was such a pro sports market, such a pro sports area. So I didn't even really follow college sports until I went to Michigan. And so like, it was kind of a crash course in like, oh wow, there's this whole culture of like planning your weekends around Saturdays instead of Sundays, you know, like it was just this whole totally different world. And my first game as a freshman was App State. So that was actually my first ever college football game. That usually endears me to everyone else who immediately hates me for being a Michigan grad. It's like, oh, great, that was your first game. Now we're good.
You're officially baptized as a college football fan because you had a really heartbreaking loss.
Yes. And so, you know, I basically just kind of like stumbled into it from there. Cause you know, at that point I had been reading Sports Illustrated cover to cover, read the sports section, but didn't realize that those were regular people with regular jobs. They just seemed really cool. And I met a girl in my dorm, that like welcome week freshman year and was talking about my dream job and said like writing for Sports Illustrated. And she was a sophomore and her best friend worked at the student paper at Michigan and like had a contact for the sports editor and was like, you should go to a meeting. And you know how we make friends in college. It's literally just like, okay, I need help. I need to join clubs. Like I need to get to know people. So I went to a meeting the day after the App State game and picked up a club ultimate Frisbee story that was terrible. Didn't know what I was doing, made a couple of friends and just kind of stuck around, you know, and went through there. And I guess probably when I realized that this was something I wanted to do for a career standpoint was the summer after my freshman year. Like I said, I'm from Jersey and I interned at the Trentonian newspaper and covered a lot of baseball. Yankees AA team is there. And then also the 12-year-old age group that goes to the Little League World Series. And I did drag racing and like all of these crazy, weird sports. And it was so fun. It was great. It was nights and weekends and all of my other friends were working at, you know, the mall like I had done the year before and restaurants and hanging out every night. And, you know, I mean, there was some FOMO, but then there wasn't. And I was just like, you know what, like this is something that doesn't feel like work on a good day. It doesn't feel like work. And, you know, I started to get better and better and just realized like writing about sports could be a potential career path. And, you know, if I worked hard and got better at it, I would have some opportunities. So that's kind of where it started. And, you know, my favorite sport to play was softball. I played tennis, I played basketball. So I kind of bounced around a little bit, obviously didn't play football. So, you know, you don't, at least, you know, when I was covering college basketball primarily, you always get like, oh, did you play? And it was kind of like almost a backhanded compliment. Like, I think they were looking for common ground, but also like, it's not rocket science to write or talk about basketball. Football, you surprisingly don't get it. They don't want to hear about my powder puff quarterback days in high school, apparently.
I would love to hear about that.
Oh, we fought dirty a little bit. I gotta say.
No, I know Michigan doesn't have a J school. Did that, I know the daily is a really big thing over there, but did that make it kind of more difficult at times, you know, kind of getting through this weird, you know, profession?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting question because I don't think it ultimately mattered. I think that there's like a couple of things that I think back about, oh, if I had been in a journalism school, I could have had a class on. But really so much of this profession, as you guys know, is like learning by doing. And so it never affected like my ability to get an internship or a job because you're doing that based on your writing samples and your clips and, you know, your reel and all of those different, whatever platform you're applying for jobs on. And it didn't matter, except there were certain times, like, again, like I would love to have had a class on like ethics. I would love to have had a class on interviewing, right? Like, I feel like I've gotten so much better as an interviewer, and that was so painful to do because you want to just be good at something like that right out of the gate. So I feel like classes like that would have helped. But ultimately, and I've talked to a lot of my J school friends, like when they would go and kind of like go out and fake report a story, like I was already doing that at the student paper. I was already getting those reps. And I think that there was a bit of pride at the Daily that we didn't have a J school, that we were sending reporters out into the world in sports and politics and news. And, you know, we were self-made. We had done it all ourselves. We didn't have a faculty advisor, which honestly was probably not like, now I think back, I'm like, we should have absolutely had a faculty advisor. There was like so much like
we didn't either. So
like, what are they thinking? And I'm pretty sure it still works that way, but there was still a lot of pride in just sort of, you know, learning by doing. And there still is that pride. I think, like, you know, it's something that comes up a lot and people are really surprised that Michigan didn't have a J school. But it does, like, I think there's a little bit something extra to, like, you know, when we get together as Michigan Daily alums.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. I think sometimes anarchy is just the best way to learn.
Yes.
Just like throw yourself in there and go to a press conference, and you're gonna mess up and you're gonna look a little bit stupid, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Just like hearing about your experiences at Michigan, it sounds so similar to the experiences that Kennedi and I had at LSU, you know, both big powerhouse schools, you know, getting all of this experience in journalism, but it also is so different, like the Big Ten versus an SEC school. So your experience is going to a Big Ten school and now transitioning to all of college football, you've kind of experienced all that there is to experience. So what has been kind of the biggest difference covering SEC schools? Like how is that new to you, and how is that different from your experience?
Yeah, that's one of the fun parts about this type of job in normal times, traveling and getting to experience all of the different, like, cultural differences, because they really are different. And I think that you don't have that appreciation for the differences until you go to these places, right? So, you know, I get asked all the time, like, what's the craziest atmosphere or best tailgating? And I always say, so I've never covered a game at Ole Miss, so they're kind of like out based on that. But I say, like, Penn State and LSU, night games in both places. They're very different.
Very different.
Both awesome, right? And both electric. And there's like this totally different. But unless you experience both of those, you don't even understand why they're that different, right? Because it's the type of food and the type of tailgating and, like, the path that you meander around on a game day. And there's something at Penn State where it's just like, you're in a field in the middle of nowhere and everyone's just in RVs and their trucks. And it's just like, that it fits perfectly for that place. And so I think that's one of the cool things is, like, the SEC obviously, you know, has so much pride across the entire region, which also is different. Because I think, honestly, until maybe the playoff era, I don't think, like, the Big Ten people felt like, oh, we got to root for the Big Ten to represent things, right? It wasn't like Michigan fans do not like rooting for Michigan State or Ohio State or Penn State or really anyone. And it's the same vice versa, where I think there is more of that not camaraderie, because I think there's still those rivalries, but there was more of a cohesion in the SEC sooner. Plus, I mean, just insane food, like great food, great tailgating. And again, it's like kind of, you know, as someone who came into college sports, you know, 18 years into their life, like it's so different in terms of, like, how ingrained it is in people's, like, upbringings and, like, the cultural ramifications. Like, you can joke all you want about not having, you know, weddings in the fall in the South, but it's a thing. Like, it's a thing in a very different way. Yeah, in a very different way than, you know, everyone I grew up with. I mean, I went to fall weddings. Like, you know, again, it's not as big a deal when most weddings are on Saturdays and everyone only cares about the Jets and Giants and the Eagles, right? Like, it's just not as big a deal. So I think it's just been very cool to learn about, like, the different traditions, and especially kind of the family ones where you see how this has been kind of this thread throughout a family's, like, fabric and life. And it's just totally different. And again, like, the cool thing about college sports is that it feels really different depending on where you are.
Absolutely.
Like the Pac-12 is totally different, right? As we learned that like people didn't really get that mad when they postponed the season. Very different than Nebraska, as we all experienced firsthand.
Yes.
So it's been very cool to see that, because obviously like the Southeast is when you think about college football, you think about that region. So it's been awesome to get to go there, to get to talk to people, to learn stories. The coaches seem to be even more of characters than anywhere else. And so it's been awesome to be exposed to that, because I don't think unless I had this job and got to go to these places and experience like a night game at LSU, I don't think you understand that stuff until you experience it.
How does being at a
Sorry, go ahead, Ken.
Oh, yeah. How does being at a place like The Athletic, which really emphasizes, that really great storytelling, help when going to all these places like LSU, Penn State, Ohio State, and telling these stories?
Yeah, I think it's been really cool because it basically tries to be everything for everyone, right? So we have people who can do X's and O's. You have people who are going to do, more traditional game stories or game columns. You have people who can do film breakdowns. And then like I also found space in like the weird stories, because you can have it all there. It's not like they're trying to be just one thing, like just for football geeks, right? Or for super broad audience. They're like, let's attract everyone. And so, part of a series that I was doing last year was, I called it Traditionally Weird, but it was about those things that are uniquely college football that don't really make sense, but we do them every single year. So it was like Workham Silly Gators, like the sign that's in the state. Like, why did that happen? Why did it start? What does it mean? Did they add the comma, right? Like all these strange pieces to something. And, there's obviously live mascots. Like there's just unique things that you get to learn about. And that was a really cool series to do, because I was able to do it for, I was trying to find things in all different regions and leagues, and there was some stuff I didn't really know about, like how Auburn does like their eagle and like how they train them, and what happens if they like leave the stadium, like how hard are they to get it back, like all of these.
I always wondered.
yeah and like just the practicing of that, and like how fast are they supposed to go, how fast are they supposed to get down to the field. So that was such a fun series, because it got to touch on all the things we're talking about, like culture and tradition, but some of the weird ones that just don't exist in pro sports, because they're businesses, it's everyone's jobs, and you just don't get obsessed with strange things in the same way you do in college.
That's so true. One of LSU's big things is hot boudin, cold couscous. And I have no idea where that came from. It doesn't really make any sense.
It just sounds fun to say.
It's very fun to say, and I will scream it at the top of my lungs every Saturday, having no idea where it came from and no idea what it means. But like, you just rally around these strange, weird little battle cries and traditions, and you don't need to know the answer why. It just feels good in the moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, with so many things that don't make sense in college football but are fun. Unfortunately, this season, so many things don't make sense and aren't very fun. So just like, how has that changed your job, and how have you seen any differences this season as opposed to regular quote unquote season?
Yeah, I think like basically kind of everything feels different. I think there's been some moments when you're watching a game and let's say like the stadium's at 25% full, and it kind of just looks like maybe it's like a Maction game, like it's just midweek game, and it sounds normal because they're pumping in noise, and like you can forget that it's a pandemic and it's off and weird. But I think for the most part you feel it or you see it, right? Because we've seen a lot of games in empty stadiums entirely, so you're just kind of thinking about it a lot. I haven't traveled anywhere, not that I'm at a game every weekend, but I would go places for features, and it's everyone's doing stuff by Zoom. We're recording this on Zoom. Everyone's doing video conferencing and chatting now, and so I absolutely would understand that they wouldn't want people to come into their facilities, and maybe we get to a different point with testing where that's more accepted, but I absolutely understand that hesitation, and they're trying to keep their programs as much of a bubble as they possibly can, even though they can't in college. So I understand, and I don't necessarily want to be flying that much. I don't necessarily want to be going around people that I don't know that well. So that's definitely a challenge, especially when you do really like doing features and getting to know people. It's a lot easier to get people to open up to you in person. And, that's absolutely a challenge. But I also think that there's a lot of stories that I'm trying to work on, but, you know, that I'm thinking about, where it's like, okay, what is different this year, uniquely 2020 for this person or this thing? And I did a story on the guy who's in charge of the Miami turnover chain, and he's in charge of that every year, but he's also now the disinfectant guy for the chain. And I'm like, okay,
2020.
So 2020, I'm like, there's a series of stories that I'm working on that are like, hopefully, knock on wood, only happening this year. Like, hopefully we're in a much better place next year. And I just think there are opportunities to tell those stories, because it is like a once in a lifetime experience. So it's like, well, what is it like to get to be the guy who presses the button to put crowd noise in? Like, what is that button labeled? I've always wondered, right? And so I get to go ask those people those questions, because they are things that, you know, people are going to think about when they're watching a game at home. But it's absolutely been different to really just do everything over the phone, everything over Zoom. And also, you know, sit on your couch on a Saturday. Some of the games got canceled, some of them didn't. And then also at the end of the night, I could just hop on anyone's Zoom. Like, it doesn't matter that I'm not there, and ask questions to coaches. So there's benefits in some ways. But for the most part, I mean, just trying to remember like the energy of games and the stuff that we love about these sporting events, and trying to make sure that that still exists in stories, even if you're writing them all over the phone or over Zoom.
Yeah, it's definitely been a strange adjustment, and just having that like face-to-face human contact has been, not having that has been so strange and different about this year. But what are your thoughts, you know, since things are so different, what are your thoughts on like the way that this season turns out this year? I feel like in everyone's mind, it's just going to have like a little asterisk. What do you think about that? How do you think that this season is going to affect seasons moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure people can argue about, you know, is this a true champion or this or that? But I kind of think everyone in every sport and all things in 2020, it's going to have the context of the pandemic and all the unique challenges. I think, you know, when hockey crowned their Stanley Cup champion, they were also in the same breath just relieved that they got through it. And they're like, so it's like, this was actually a special championship because of all of the things that had to be overcome to even play the games. So I think, you know, I'm sure we're going to have lots of arguments, especially if teams play vastly different amounts of games. You know, the playoffs going to be more subjective than ever, but actually I look forward to that, because I think that's going to be the most normal part of all of this if we get to that point. But yeah, it'll probably have an asterisk, but again, like, I just kind of think everything will in really all aspects of life.
That's the most glass half full perspective I've heard.
Honestly.
Well, I've talked to
like, it's not real, it's not going to happen, you know, you're not actually going to win, but that you're so right that it's just like the biggest sigh of relief that we did it.
Well, and this was something like I had talked to Larry Scott about like in July, and it was just sort of, you know, is there going to be a minimum for the playoff to qualify, this and that? And it was just sort of like, okay, if we get to the point where we're arguing about that in December, that's great. That means we got through it. And so I just sort of like adopted that. I kind of stole it from Larry Scott and just started using that, because I do think if we get to that point where we're arguing about asterisks, that means we got to a national championship game. So you guys can steal it. It makes you sound very optimistic, but also it makes sense.
Yeah, it really does. I'll give you creds on that one.
Well, I guess in that same breath, I guess we mentioned this off camera, but you've gotten a lot of flack for, you know, forcing the college football season to be canceled and like all of this. And clearly we know you haven't had any hand in any type of cancellation, but how has that, you know, process these last few months been for you as you kind of go through reporting on everything that's going on in college football?
Yeah, it's been a challenge. I think that a lot of people haven't wanted to face the possibility of not having a season, and that's fans, that's coaches, that's players. And, you know, I've compared it a lot to like reporting on a natural disaster, like a hurricane. It's like, okay, well, a hurricane is coming. Here's how people are preparing. These are the contingency plans, which is, okay, there's a pandemic. Here are how people are preparing for the season. Here are the contingency plans. But then you get labeled that you're rooting against a season, but nobody labels you as like rooting for the hurricane in these other settings. And so that was a challenge. And I think that like it was frustrating because I'm just trying to do the best job I can. I'm making sure that everything I'm writing has proper context, that I was learning from doctors throughout all of this. And again, really covering all those potential changes and tweaks and the way schedules were going to work in conference championship games. And I think that, so yeah, I think like I would not have been able to get through it without, you know, other female sports writers who are like, what do I need to block? Who do I need to call? Like, what do we need to do here? What do we need to do to make sure that you feel safe, feel supported, feel loved? And that's really the key, I think, because even in like normal times and, you know, in situations where you're not dealing with like online harassment, you still need your girls and you still need those group chats, because they're the only people that go through the exact same types of stuff that you do and be like, how did you handle this? Like, what did you say? This person made this comment. What do I do? Honestly, like that's the only thing that's kept me sane, group chats with female sports writers. I mean, that's basic. And I tell I think my male sports writer friends are a little jealous of some of this, but like, honestly, they don't need it as much. They don't deserve it.
Seriously, I think that this has been like men and other writers who are covering the coronavirus and things that they maybe not have covered before. And they're getting so many threatening tweets in their mentions and responses that are so out of line. I think they kind of have been put in the shoes of a female sports writer or a female in sports, because we deal with that all the time. You know, I always say that we have to prepare twice as much to be respected half as much as men. So it's just kind of, you see how vicious people truly can be behind their keyboards. And we've seen that, you know, with the remarks about Ray Taylor's outfit and Katie Nolan. It's incredibly unfortunate that that's the things that we have to put up with by just doing our job. And Kennedi and I had the privilege to talk to some up and coming female sports journalists. So just what would your biggest advice be? Because you have such a great perspective on it. And I think that's something that you have to learn and you have to really grow some tough skin. So what's your greatest advice to not just up and coming female sports journalists, but just females in general who've just had enough?
Yeah, I think that it's something that I end up talking about with friends in other professions. It's definitely different in a male dominated profession where most of the time we're covering male athletes and male coaches as well. So it can be isolating. And so again, like the first thing you have to do is like find your tribe and like get your people that will help you get through it. And the things you're talking about, like prepare twice as hard, right? Like even basic stuff like, okay, what am I wearing? How am I getting that person's phone number? What time am I texting them? What tone am I using? You need to have people who will help you do that, because it's just so much extra work and like almost like it can be exhausting. So you need other people who are thinking about those things, who can just help you through things. And then I think you just have to remember why you're doing it. You're doing it because you want to tell stories and connect with people and build relationships. And you are going to do that, and you're going to be able to do it in a different way with a different perspective than anyone else because of who you are and because of your background. And that's part of the reason that I think sometimes people get threatened by women in different types of roles in media in general, but sports media too, because you can't just be put in a box anymore. You're going to be able to share your opinion and do all these different types of roles now. And there's not just the one anymore, right? There's different people coming up and different platforms and podcasts and TV and comedy and all these different spaces. And I think that can be obviously unsettling for people who like the status quo. But I think that that's part of the reason why, like, if there's strength in numbers, if you're able to get through and you're able to pull somebody with you, that matters. And so again, it's just like the networking piece. Like I've tried to really connect a lot of our female writers, The Athletic, who cover different sports, with each other, because I think it's so easy to just stay in your own silo. And I think we're all going through very similar stuff. We're going through same things as, I'm friends with a lot of college football sideline reporters. Like our jobs are different, but we're all dealing with the same type of thing. And we all just want the same type of thing. We want to do what we love. We want to tell people stories, build relationships, be treated with respect, and do our jobs well. And I think there's a lot of commonalities. And I think one thing that's changed in the last few years or whatever, maybe again, because there've been more high profile women in different types of roles. Like I think like Mina Kimes is a great example of like that role didn't exist. And that opens up opportunities for different types of, of humor and analysis, and also like straight X's no talk that didn't exist before Mina. It didn't exist, wouldn't have existed 8 years ago, 10 years ago. And so I just think that, you know, it's just, you have to just keep pulling other people with you and then spotlighting that stuff, because when we were growing up, when I'm growing up, all I see are women who are sideline reporters or the host. Mm-hmm. And so it mattered. It meant a lot to me. In the Big Ten Network lets me be an analyst, and it's a male host asking me questions, and I get to give my opinion. So all of that stuff, everything seems so little, but it all really matters. And I just think we don't have to be like, oh, you know, I'm a woman prefacing everything you do, but just being in those spaces matters. And I think, you know, I think like you do have to have thick skin. I'm just kind of rambling here, but like you do have to have thick skin, but you also have to remember like what you like about it, because if you're only going to get like worked up about, you know, what people are saying or wanting to be liked, like it's probably not a great idea to be like in these types of roles. There's other ways to, if you're doing this just because you like sports, keep sports as your passion and do something else, because you're going to lose some of that. You're going to lose your fandom. It's going to like nights and weekends, not a great schedule. So you have to love the actual act of telling stories, reporting, digging for information, sharing, communicating information, talking to people. And because we all love sports and we came up through sports, like that's the commonality. But you have to think of that and then focus on that. And I think too, in the last, 5-10 years, because there are more women, because women are doing different things, I think there's just been more camaraderie. And like, I don't know, what changes with that. Maybe it is just the strength in numbers. But I also think that for a long time, people felt like there could only be one woman in this space doing this one thing. And now we're seeing different types of jobs. We're seeing different types of women. And I think that that's helped. So it's easier to just root for everyone and pull everybody up and like defend other people, jump in on things, like hype people up, instead of assuming like, which again, I'm sure existed in some world, that like, oh, just there's one Maria Taylor. No, like Maria would tell you the first thing. She would say like she'd like to have 100 of people who look like her, who can do different types of stuff. It's part of the reason she does so many different things at once, which like I don't know how she does it and how she sleeps.
Seriously.
Insane. But you don't have to be the only one anymore. And I think that's something that's shifted. And like that's why I try to like always expand my network and like introduce people to other people, because all of our networks should be growing. We all should be, kind of pulling in that same direction. Doesn't mean you have to like every other woman just because they're a woman, but we don't have to all compete for like the one job. Like we can just create more jobs. So I'm rambling. You guys can cut me off, but
go ahead.
I just think it's important because again, and it's so easy to be like, when you get asked about being a woman in sports, about like all the negatives, right? And everything you have to endure, but there's also some amazing women in this field that how else would we ever have met them? How else would we have ever gotten to know them? And how tough they are just by what they do deal with to do this job. Because it is harder to do the same job that everyone else is doing. And so you just like, you're starting these friendships, these relationships with other women in the field from like that basic level of respect.
Yeah. That I think of Laura Oakman and the Galvanize program, that her slogan is "Girls compete and women empower." Hi, sweet boy.
Oh my yes, Red is making his debut.
Red does a little sweater.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's that extra layer of maturity and knowledge that comes with, hey, like we can do the same things and we can do what we do and we can empower each other, and that's only going to make me better and that's only going to make you better, and we're just going to create this network and system and make it easier for women coming up here in the future.
Exactly. So like that's the goal. I mean, I think when you stand up for yourself and fight for things, you're doing it so that it will hopefully be easier for others.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Kennedi and I know how like that struggle and how difficult it can be, but I mean, thank you for now joining our network of women in sports.
Yes.
But before you go, I want to get this is an SEC podcast. I want to get your SEC picks for the season.
Okay.
Your East and your West picks.
Okay. Well, I'm feeling a lot better about my Florida pick out of the East. We had to do picks.
Both, sister.
Well, so actually we didn't officially do these. We did playoff picks, but this was back when the Big Ten and the Pac-12 were still out. So we haven't revised them, but I was like, all right, well, we're going to get 2 from the SEC. That was going to be my goal.
Right.
Jamie Newman had just opted out, and I was very hesitant, which now after watching the first half against Arkansas, feeling really good about that hesitancy. So I think I'm in on Florida in the East, and then obviously Alabama in the West. LSU, I apologize to you guys, just lost so much from the roster, everyone. And, but I also think that's fine because there's literally no pressure to repeat when everyone knows that it's just like a totally different roster. Exactly. So I always just pick Nick Saban and Alabama until I'm proven otherwise, because it's just not a smart idea to go with a dark horse pick in the West.
I can take that. You can hop on our Kyle Pitts for Heisman train.
I'm calling them the Kyles, like just to refer to like the Trask to Pitts little, dynamic we've got going. But I do like that. I'm always on board for any non-quarterback Heisman campaign. So
I'm 100% in on Kyle Pitts. Kyle Trask is great too. I'm high on him, but
I also called Henry To'oTo'o for Heisman. I would love to see a linebacker Heisman.
Yes.
That's like the biggest revenge after Charles Woodson beat out Peyton Manning for the Heisman. Yes. That's just like Tennessee's biggest revenge is like, you know what? We're going to have a linebacker win the Heisman this year.
Well, great player, great name, and a defensive player for the Heisman. I'm all in. Just like keep tagging me in all of these Heisman campaigns and I will amplify them. I found out a couple weeks ago that there was this weird little corner of the internet that had claimed that Tulane and Navy, when they play, that they should play for a trident. So it was like hashtag Trident Trophy. And I was like obsessed. I was obsessed. So I think I tweeted about it like 6 times when they were playing. And I was like, this is my new favorite thing. So I'm all in on these Heisman campaigns, and these are more traditional than a Trident Trophy. So,
I stand weird college football trophies. They're like 100%. My favorite.
Yes.
I also love the weird turnover objects. Like I'm all in on the turnover pencil.
And love the pencil. And there was like a fur coat. Somebody had a fur coat. I liked that one too.
I missed that.
Fur coat.
Mm-hmm. And then Ole Miss, the cash bag.
Oh, that's the most Lane Kiffin thing.
I know. I mean, but I love it. I love whoever greenlit that, because like that has to go from what a hilarious idea to okay, we're gonna actually let you carry a bag of cash.
We're gonna spend money on it. Like I was amazed at the amount of money that Miami puts into their turnover chain.
Yes,
but I respect it.
I respect it all. But see, this is like what I'm saying. Like, all of these things you don't have in pro sports. I would have missed out on all of this if I didn't go to a school that had big time college football and ended up working in it. I would just see like a turnover pencil and just think it was so weird instead of this is the greatest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah. Or sometimes they just like don't even bat an eye. Like, he's breakdancing in the middle of the field. Like, cool. Yeah. It's just another Saturday.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Nicole, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being an advocate for women in sports, and thank you for just chatting football with us.
Absolutely, anytime. And also, this is how it works. Like, now you guys are in my network as well, and so you can't leave. That's just how it works.
I'm perfectly fine. It's fine with both of us.
There could be worse things.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks, Nicole.